Hello and welcome to Board Game Strategy with Victor Fuller. In episode 2 we'll be examining the strategy of Stone Age. First of all, let's take a look at the board so we can agree on names for the various stations. Hunting Grounds, Wood Station, Brick Station, Stone Station, Gold Station, Civilization Cards, Building Tiles, Agriculture Track, Toolmaker, Hut, Field. In Stone Age, we purchase resources with dice and workers, and then sell them to obtain victory points. This buying and selling suggests a simple economy, and indeed the road to victory in Stone Age is to regard the game as an economy. So each economy has a currency. What is the currency in Stone Age? The currency is the pip, and a pip is one spot on a dice.
If we roll one dice for food at the hunting ground and we roll a 2, we get one food in return. While it's true that if we roll a 3, we also get one food in return, we'll say for the moment that the basic exchange rate is 2 pips equals 1 food, and we'll say more about the complications later on. Likewise, 3 pips equals 1 wood, 4 pips equals 1 brick, 5 pips equals 1 stone, and 6 pips equals 1 gold.
To simplify our analysis of the Stone Age economy, let's split it into 3. Production, resources, and victory points. Firstly, let's look at production. Production covers workers, tools, and agriculture. Can we assign a pip value per turn to each of these 3 production actors? Well, agriculture is fairly straightforward. For each push we have on the agriculture track, we acquire 1 food per turn, and 1 food is equal to 2 pips. Tools generate 1 pip per turn. However, a tool can often rescue otherwise lost pips. If, for example, I throw 1 dice for gold and I get a 5, 1 tool allows me to still pick up a gold and thus rescue 5 pips. And people wiser than me have estimated that this additional value of a tool is equal to 0.2. Thus the value of a tool is 1.2 pips per turn. A worker allows us to throw a dice, and the average value on a d6 is 3.5. However, a worker also costs us 1 food per turn, and a food is equal to 2 pips, thus 3.5 minus 2 equals 1.5 pips per turn for a worker.
To summarise our pip values, agriculture 2 pips per turn, tools 1.2 pips per turn, and workers 1.5 pips per turn.
The purely numerical analysis I've presented so far is far from the whole story. In fact, it suggests that our best plan is simply to push on the agriculture track and do nothing else, and this is clearly nonsense. There's another attribute that's often overlooked in this type of analysis that these actors possess, and that attribute is utility. Utility gives us the ability to pursue our strategic and tactical goals whilst at the same time impeding those of our opponents. Now, it's not something that can be measured. In fact, the amount of utility embodied in these production actors varies from player to player. I would suggest that the worker contains by far the most utility. However, the agriculture and tools free up the worker from the relentless task of collecting resources every turn, so they do have their own utility. So given what we know about the numerical values and the utility of the production actors, I'd like to suggest what I think are your best options for collecting production actors at the start of the game.
Agriculture push, worker, tool.
The order in which you pick these up isn't critical, and in practice you'll be acquiring them as opportunity arises. But if you could get 2 agriculture pushes in the first 2 turns, in a 13-turn game, this would net you 50 pips, which is nearly 17 wood. You want to be getting a worker very early on, for reasons which I'll explain later. You want to be getting a tool early on, as your first tool gives you a lot of utility and can often rescue otherwise lost pips. When we acquire production actors, there's a cost involved. How many turns does it take us to recover that cost? An agriculture track push requires us to put a worker on the field. That worker we could otherwise have used to acquire resources and thus earn us 3.5 pips. So there's a cost of 3.5 pips. However, we recover 1 food immediately, which is 2 pips. So 3.5 minus 2 is 1.5, and the very next turn we recover that. So that's a total of 2 turns from the acquisition turn. The tool likewise costs us 3.5 pips, but we recover 1.2 pips immediately for a net of 2.3. It then takes us a further 2 turns to recover 2.3 for a total of 3 turns from the acquisition turn. Now a worker costs us 2 workers, which is 7 pips. We have to pay a food that turn for another 2 pips for a total of 9. And we can't use the additional worker until the next turn, and it takes us 6 turns to recover 9 pips for a total of a whopping 7 turns from the acquisition turn.
Here's a graphic summarising the payback times for the production actors. Agriculture 2 turns, tool 3 turns, and worker 7 turns.
The lesson here is that although we can be picking up agriculture track pushes and tools almost until the end of the game, we're only picking up workers in the second half of the game for the utility bonuses they confer, because we're not going to get any resource bonuses. I'll conclude our look at production with one more topic, which is what are the total number of these resource actors that we would ideally like to acquire. Collect 5 tools. 5 tools will allow you to pick up any one resource with 1 dice throw. And as the utility of tools falls off with each additional tool, more than 5 is not efficient. You want to pick up 2 workers or a 3rd worker if you feel you can use the additional utility it confers. We would like to pick up as many workers as possible, but as we've seen, the payback time on workers is so large that we don't have time to pick up more than 2 or 3. We don't want to be paying more than 2 food per turn for our workers, so push your agriculture track up to 5, 6 or 7. I mean, these are goals we're aiming for, and we might not achieve this. Also, we're bearing in mind that we might want to exceed these numbers if we've got civilization card bonuses. There is one more thing to say about production, and it's fairly self-evident if you've played more than a couple of games of Stone Age. As the game progresses, the battle for civilization cards and building tiles becomes more and more intense, and if you're dithering around collecting production actors, you'll be missing out on victory points. So you only really want to be collecting these in the latter part of the game if you've got civilization bonuses that make it worthwhile. Let's now turn our attention to resource collection. How can we acquire resources in the most efficient manner? Firstly, we'll look at acquiring resources without tools. Let's suppose it's near the start of the game and you're yet to acquire a tool. You've got no tools. You place one worker at the hunting grounds and roll 1 dice. 3 rolls of the 6 are odd and you'll lose 1 pip. This amounts to a loss of 0.5 on that transaction, a tax if you like of 0.5. If you place 2 workers at the hunting grounds and roll 2 dice, there's still as many odd as even rolls and you'll still pay the same tax of 0.5, but you'll collect on average twice as much food. Therefore this is more efficient. So your best plan without tools is to place as many workers as possible when collecting resources. So tools change things considerably. If I've got 1 tool and place 1 worker at the hunting grounds, if I now roll an odd number, I can round up with the tool and I'm never liable for the 0.5 tax. And the rule is that if you've got tools equal to the resource cost minus 1, you're covered and you can simply place 1 tool. Now if you haven't got tools equal to the resource cost minus 1, the rule of placing as many workers as possible still applies. Now suppose you place workers on 2 resource stations. Which one do you want to roll first? Well, the answer is you always want to roll on the highest station first. The reason, and use your tools up to round up. The reason being that if you're going to lose a resource, you're better off losing a lower value resource than a higher value resource. The resource that you'll be acquiring the most of will definitely be wood. Wood is the cheapest resource and we want to use wood to pay for civilization cards. And we want to pick up as many civilization cards as possible. And we'll certainly be collecting far more civilization cards than building tiles. So if you find yourself locked out of wood, then go for brick. And if the only time that you'll be placing workers on the stone and the gold stations is if you need a specific stone or gold to pay for a building tile.
That concludes resources, and now we'll look at victory points.
Victory points. There's 2 aspects to this. Firstly, you want to be hoovering up as many building tiles and civilization cards as you possibly can. And there's not a lot I can say about that other than you just do it. And the other thing is that the building tiles and civilization cards you do acquire, you want to acquire those with the best efficiencies, the best conversion from resources to victory points. So let's take a look at building tiles first. And building tiles are certainly not all equal. You want to be purchasing the building tiles with the biggest cost, and the reason is that there's a base transaction cost to each building tile of 1 worker, and that costs you 3.5 pips. And this is the same whether you buy a building tile that costs you 10 points or a building tile that returns you 42 points.
Presented on the graphic are the worst and the best of the building tiles. Now the worst returns us 10 victory points and it costs us 13.5 pips, giving us an efficiency of 0.74 victory points per pip. And the best is the card where we pay 1 to 7 of the same resource, and in the unlikely event we were to pay 7 gold, this would return us 42 victory points for a cost of 45.5 pips, giving us an efficiency of 0.92 victory points per pip. So there's quite a range between the worst and the best of the building tiles. Let's use this range of 0.74 to 0.92 per pip as a guide to help us when purchasing civilization cards. Let's say that 1 pip equals 0.8 victory points and 1 victory point equals 1.25 pips.
Let's turn our attention to civilization cards. So a civilization card costs between 1 and 4 resources. The top of the card describes a resource bonus and the bottom of the card describes a victory point bonus. So we're now in a position to answer such questions as, is it worth buying that civilization card that costs 4 resources? What's the best civilization card of the 4? And is it better, given the civilization cards that are present, to buy a civilization card or a building tile?
Let's imagine the 4 civilization tiles shown are present. We'll examine each in turn. Okay, let's have a look at the card in position 1. The resource costs are the placement of 1 worker plus 1 resource. That's 3.5 plus 3 equals 6.5. Well, we'll always assume wood as the resource that you're going to be spending. There's a resource mitigation of 4 food. Each food equals 2 pips, so that's 8 pips. So there's a total cost of 8 minus 6.5, which is plus 1.5. We actually gain 1.5 pips with this card. So that means that any victory points that we get are going to be totally free. So we get 1 point for every building. So you're going to have to gauge how many buildings you're likely to end up with at the end of the game. So we'll assume 6. So you'll be gaining 6 VP and you'll be getting them for free. So this looks like a very good buy indeed to me, unless you were, say, on the last turn of the game where the resource cost might be irrelevant. You just want to hoover up as many VP as possible. So the card in position 2, there's a cost of 1 worker plus 2 resources, 9.5 pips, and there's a mitigation of 3 tools, which is 3.6 pips and gives us a total of approximately minus 6 pips. And now the victory point reward, we have to gauge the number of tools we're going to have at the end of the game, and let's assume 6. So we gain 6 victory points, which costs us 6 pips, and the cost per victory point is 1 pip. Now that's better than the 1.2 pips we pay for buildings, so you would prefer this card over buildings. The only caveat being that 6 VP is not very many, and on the last turn or second last turn, you might forego the resource cost and pick up something with more victory points. Position 3. So the cost is 1 worker plus 3 resources for 12.5 pips, and there's a large mitigation here of 5 food at 2 pips each equals 10 pips for an overall cost of minus 2.5 pips. Now the reward is a technology. So how do we gauge how much a technology is worth to us? Well, we've got to make an estimate of how many of these we're going to end up with at the end of the game, and if we're actively collecting them, we'll probably get at least 6. So let's say 6, and then you want to regard every technology card you pick up as worth 6 VP. So don't regard the first technology card you pick up as being 1 point, the second would be worth 3 points, and the third worth 5, and so on. Just regard them all as 6. So we've got a reward of 6 VP for a cost of 2.5 pips, which gives us a cost per VP of 0.42, which is a bargain, and I would say this card is well worth picking up. The card in position 4 costs us 1 worker plus 4 resources, for 15.5 pips, and we get to roll 2 dice at 3.5 pips each as a mitigation. So we're going to get back on average 7 pips. So this card is going to cost us 8.5 pips. Now the reward, we're going to have to gauge how many workers we're likely to end up at the end of the game. Well, it's probably going to be 7. So this card will net us 14 VP, and 8.5 over 14 equals 0.61. So this card is also a bargain. This is well within this, it's twice as good as a building card, and it gives us a lot of victory points. So this is an excellent card to pick up.
I wouldn't suggest you calculate the victory point efficiency of every single civilization card every turn. That would be crazy, and often it's fairly self-evident what are the good and what are the bad buys. But if there is one that you are and hawing about, it's not too difficult to do these calculations, and this would give you a good guide. We posed the question earlier that we should be able to determine of the 4 civilization cards which is the best purchase. Well, the answer is it depends. It depends what stage of the game we're at, and it depends what civilization bonuses we've got, and it depends if we're collecting technology cards, and it also depends on what your opponent's collecting. So the 4 civilization cards that we saw were all good buys, and they were all significantly better than purchasing a building tile. And it's often the case that at least the first 3 civilization cards are good buys, and generally you're only picking up building tiles when you've got stone or gold you want to use up, or it's near the end of the game and you've got a bunch of wood and brick that you want to get rid of, or the only place that you can get additional victory points is to place a worker on a building tile. Let's have a look now at free-for-all cards.
Free-for-all cards are great at the start of the game for picking up tools and advancing your agriculture track. Yes, it's true that we give our opponents bonuses as well, but if you don't pick up this card, somebody else will, and you're likely to end up with the wood instead of an agriculture push. So what are our chances of getting either a tool or an agriculture push? In a 2-player game it's 56%, in a 3-player game it's 70%, and in a 4-player game it's 80%. Now if you're hunting for either a tool specifically or an agriculture specifically, then in a 2-player game your chances are 31%, in a 3-player game 42%, and in a 4-player game 52%.
That's all. I hope I explained that clearly. There were quite a few subtle and tricky points there. If you did understand it, it's you that's going to be impressing the gals the next time you play Stone Age at your board games club. Have fun and play nicely.